Little thing.
Just waiting for the program to catch up.
Hmm.
Okay, we are live. I do definitely miss how it used to say live streaming has started when we used to use the other thing.
Yeah, it would give us kind of a starting pistol.
But good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're just getting started. Tonight's episode is Werewolf, Their Wolf, Their Castle. We're going to be talking about werewolves and other shapeshifters. Um, just keep hold on for 1 second while I post things. Um, Brian, I'm sure, has forgotten to bring his keys, so
Yeah.
he can't jangle them to keep you entertained.
Or my alternate title for tonight's show would have been Au Werewolves of London.
Funny enough, when I was in Romania, our version of like the military hoo-ah and all that was
Hmm.
that woo.
Yeah, we do that in Werewolf.
Makes sense. But it's like if you're gonna be in Romania, you gotta go with the flow a little.
Yeah.
Actually, I should mention that, and I should put the link in the description. Folks, I have also just recently appeared on Laura X Timbers YouTube channel. She's a very nice lady who was kind enough to interview me. Um, I'll put a link in the description so you can go check that out. Brian, did you two ever sort out you getting an interview?
No, not yet. She said she would contact me at some time later. And so we'll
Fair
see.
enough. Somebody
I missed my
somebody came
chance.
up the first time. It happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were trying. Actually, funny enough, it was my fiance Amishu who was like, "Hey, why don't you do werewolves?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we haven't done werewolves in a while.
Yeah.
We've done a lot about vampires and demons and ghosts and fairies lately, which is all part of our thing. But yeah, um, I always like find werewolves interesting because I've talked before and I stand by. There are a couple of archetypes in folklore
Mhm.
that cross generational cultural boundaries in really interesting ways. Almost every culture you can think of has stories of the restless dead of ghosts,
Mhm.
or the hungry dead like vampires. Not necessarily for blood, but breath, or they feed on something. Dragons are also pretty universal. And one of the other things I would add to that list is shapeshifters.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say werewolf. I don't say werewolf for a reason because werewolves are very common. You find them just about legends of werewolves, just about every country that has wolves in it or had wolves in it in the past. So England, Germany, France, the Americas all have werewolf legends going back thousands of years.
Right.
You don't find a whole lot of werewolf legends in Africa, which doesn't have a big wolf population.
Right. But you get other shapeshifters.
Yeah, lions are pretty common in Africa.
Yeah.
In Scandinavian countries, bears are extremely common.
Mhm.
And Japan, I believe, has some wolf stories, but foxes are the big one.
Yeah, they like foxes and tigers and things.
Yes, but foxes are also interesting in their own right because there are fox shapeshifters in Japan, in China, in Vietnam. They're like all over Asia. There's a very common motif, and they all have slightly. They're all tricksters, but they have different takes on it. Just like he's more of a god than a traditional shapeshifter, but coyote in Native American folklore changes shape regularly, and there are legends of coyote all over what's now the United States.
Mhm.
And the role he fills every archetype you can think of in fiction, in mythology and folklore. He is creator. He is devil. He is always a trickster.
Yep.
Um, but it's just fascinating to me that these ideas are so universal. I can't say for certain. I doubt anyone will ever be able to say for certain, but I would suspect that if you went to North Sentinel Island, we're the last major untapped group of human beings that haven't had contact with the outside world in thousands of years. I bet if you could sit down and talk to them, they have at least one shapeshifter legend.
Mhm.
Maybe not a lot because it's an island, so you're pretty quickly going to go, wait, if there are all these shapeshifters, why aren't we seeing them more often?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Irish have the Selkie,
Hmm.
the seal shapeshifters, which is pretty wild.
I believe they're also in Scandinavian folklore as well.
Could be, yeah.
And Native Americans have lots of shapeshifters.
Yeah, that's a big
The
part of
most
their
famous is
culture.
obviously the skinwalkers, but some shamans are supposed to be able to change shape.
hmm There's whole
Um,
societies of
you even
animal
find a lot
people.
of shapeshifter folklore. The thing you'll find is that it's usually predatory animals. But in some cultures, there are some particularly native cultures where it is actually more herbivorous animals. Bison,
hmm
buffalo, for example.
Yeah, or deer.
And I think there's a logic. I mean, obviously, as a paranormal guy, I don't explain everything naturally, but I think there's a natural explanation for a lot of this, which is a type of magic that we have historical record of a lot of people practicing, particularly tribal people, which is what you could call totem magic, where you put on the skin of an animal and you do dances in honor of an animal to try to draw the animal's power into yourself when you're going to go to war or when you're going to hunt,
Yeah.
which explains to us why um they're usually predators. Is well, if you're going to go hunting, a cow spirit isn't going to do you a lot of good. They don't
Right.
hunt. You want something with the instincts and the speed and the strength of a hunter.
Yeah.
The place that you see, I think, the clearest indication of this in actual history, and this is actually recorded history, is in Viking culture.
Yeah, the
I mean,
berserker,
there are two
wolfzerker.
different Viking societies or Viking warrior traditions, I should say, with this idea in them. There are berserkers and there are ulfzerkers. Now, berserkers are famous. Most people know the word, going berserk or berserk. Movies, TV shows, anime, role playing games, where basically somebody goes crazy and just starts attacking everything around them. They'll even attack their own allies. This was an actual class of warrior in Viking society. And the name Berserker translates as bear shirt.
Mhm.
There were people that put on bear skin and went into battle and were famous for their strength and ferocity. Ulfzerker is the one that not as many people talk about, but it's the same idea, except instead of a bear, they're channeling the power of a wolf.
Yep.
And also famous for their ferocity in battle. So, yeah, I think if you want to take the question from a purely scientific standpoint, and for that matter, I think this applies mystically as well, and I'll get to that in a second. But from a purely scientific standpoint, you start with, especially in Europe, you start with European Christian war knights fighting the Vikings when they did raids and fighting these crazy warriors that were all dirty and covered in animal hides. And it becomes a small step to the guy charged at me wearing a bearskin cloak. So the guy turned into a bear and attacked me.
Mhm.
Particularly with werewolf folklore, people have this notion that a werewolf bites you and you turn into a werewolf. But that's from the movies. It's not from werewolf mythology.
Right.
Usually, you become a werewolf either because someone curses you, or because you make a deal with the devil, you do certain magical spells, and in most cases, you put on a belt made out of wolf skin, and that's what allows you to make the transformation. And then to turn back, you take the belt off.
Yeah. There's also, of course,
So
being
again, from a
under
strictly
inauspicious
anthropological
circumstance.
scientific standpoint, this logically fits into these warriors in Viking culture who would put on animal skins before they went into battle. Thoughts,
Oh, I was just adding.
Brian? I can't hear
Yeah.
you.
Oh, you can't? Huh.
Okay. Yeah, you've gotten muted, dude.
Oh, I didn't do anything.
I don't know what's
Still
going on.
hearing me.
I'm going to unmute the channel a second, folks, so I can make sure that we have any sound. Okay, this might be a problem.
Huh. Wonder if the
Hello, can anyone
people.
hear us?
Wonder if the people at home can still hear me.
Channel a second, folks, so I can make sure. Okay, that's what's going on. Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. I turned the volume down on my headset and I accidentally turned it
I
off.
figured it might be something that's silly.
Yeah.
If you
So I
brush
mean,
the volume knob.
so you were fine. The audience could hear me. I was wrong.
Okay, so the audience could still hear me. The only thing I had added when you were talking about werewolf creation was also there are a few myths where being born under inauspicious circumstances or being born on Christmas Day or
Yep.
something like that can mark someone as fated to become a werewolf.
Or a vampire or both.
Yeah, yeah,
A good friend of the channel, Patrick Thomas, was born on Christmas Day. So I often like to joke about him being a vampire or a werewolf.
yep. I made that joke too
Yep.
or on his birthday last time.
And for that matter, if your parent was a werewolf, it's all in many cultures. It's thought that you will also be a werewolf.
Yeah, it could sometimes be hereditary.
Germany particularly has a lot of has the whole hereditary idea, as I understand it. Although other cultures do as well. And the other one I always find particularly fascinating because I was just watch. I think it was, yeah, I was watching the reboot of Ducktales today, and they made a comment about the idea of the um reverse werewolf. Like, yeah, that's totally a thing.
Yeah,
In a bunch of cultures, animals turn into people. Particularly, for example, hang on. Yeah, they can still hear us.
yeah.
Or just making sure everything's working and everything is working again. Good. Wow. According to okay, why did it say 9? Weird. But and we have similar ideas in a lot of other cultures where before battle or before hunt, putting on the skin to gain the power. Um, which even tracks for that matter into cannibalism, because a lot of times the whole idea in cannibalism is you eat at least historical cannibalism, not modern day. Although even some modern day serial killers, you eat the heart of your enemy to gain your enemy's strength and courage.
Yeah.
You don't just eat people. Yeah, there are cultures that eat people for other religious reasons. There's or at least at one time there was a odd sect of Hinduism that survived even into the 20th, or I hesitate to call it a sect of Hinduism, but there was a religious sect in India where cannibalism was a funeral rite.
Hmm.
Um, but and then by no means am I trying to imply that's common. Even in India, most other groups shun them, as I understand it, and I'm not certain if they still exist or not. But yeah, there was at least one group that had this idea, um, which also relates into werewolf legends another way, because if you read a lot of medieval accounts of werewolves, like okay, now I'm forgetting every historical werewolf, but in France particularly, there was a lot of examples of people that were put on trial as by the witch hunts. Charles Garnet, Peter Stubb, Henry Garden, But they were not only were they called werewolves, witches, but they burned as werewolves.
Hmm.
Um, because basically, if you read a lot of the medieval books about werewolves, or about witches, I should say, excuse me, it's just a type. They talk about them being able to transform into animals. So to the witch hunters, yeah, if you're a werewolf, you're just the type of witch.
Hmm.
But at least in some of the accounts, um, there's a strong implication that a number of historians and paranormal investigators have commented on that what they might actually be describing, rather than someone who can actually turn into a wolf, is serial killers,
Right.
particularly cannibalistic serial killers. I mean, there's even a couple of stories. Um, when I say stories in this case, I actually mean more historical accounts, not just myths, where the guy runs around on all fours and attacks people and particularly grabs and steals children to devour. But he doesn't actually, and they call him a werewolf, even though he never actually physically changes.
Hmm.
So it's like, it's thought, and I think there's an argument to be made there, that no, this guy was a serial killer who went kind of nuts and feral and started attacking people that way.
Yeah. More lycanthropy than, yeah, the medical mental health version of lycanthropy.
It's the delusion that you are cannot either have become a wolf or possibly become a werewolf, which is very rare.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen, nor am I saying that it's anything other than a psychiatric condition, but it's not a very common one, regardless. Um, Although, yeah, it could argue this is a modern way of describing historical phenomenon of people having this kind of delusion. Another interesting school of thought um, that I've seen some occult practitioners suggest is that werewolves are essentially a type of astral projection.
Oh yeah, the Benedante idea.
Mm. Although some of them, particularly, there's a book called Monsters by John Michael Greer, who suggests that Native American, all werewolf folklore is people leaving their body at in an astral form and then using um ectoplasm, essentially, although it's more an etheric thing, to make
Hmm.
it more condensed so they actually can physically affect the world. Um, what I like about this hypothesis is that it explains that in a lot of there are stories of someone being a werewolf and then they're found asleep in bed.
Hmm.
So and things of that nature that would suggest, or the werewolf simply disappearing, or other weird things. Um, or disappearing and then being found awake, asleep in bed, I should say. The problem I have with it is a large part of what they base this theory on is that silver. They argue silver is a natural inhibitor to the astral form in these types of energies,
Hmm.
and that's why silver bullets are supposed to be to kill werewolves.
Yeah.
Which sounds all well and good until you realize that, much like being bitten into by a werewolf turns you into a werewolf, that idea is also from Hollywood.
Yeah. Or only transforming under a full moon.
Yep. There are certainly wolves and werewolves in folklore that only transform under special conditions they don't control, which, but usually it's not. It doesn't have anything to do with the moon. Like, there are various people that were supposed to be cursed to turn into a wolf for 7 years.
Hmm.
The whole family, they that every few years one of them would have to swim across the lake, take off their clothes, and leave them on an island. And then when they swam back, they'd be a wolf for 7 years. And then they got to turn back into human, and somebody else had to do it. Um, but that was a family curse situation, like we talked about, being born under the wrong signs, pissing off the wrong supernatural being. Um,
Hmm.
St. Patrick is supposed to have turned a number of people into wolves.
Yeah. And of course, the Roman genesis of the term lycanthropy, the king Lycos, or like,
Lycion, I think.
yeah,
Which is actually originally a Greek story that like everything else, the Romans just adopted.
yeah,
Whereas I understand it, he was a cannibal and he tried to trick Zeus into eating human flesh,
yeah.
which is a huge taboo
And he was, yeah, and he was turned, him and his followers were turned into a pack of wolves.
by Zeus. And Pert
Yeah,
was like, "You pissed off the king of the gods, dude. Oops."
yeah, bad move.
Yeah. Particularly, it's like, yeah, Zeus is not known for being merciful. The point is unrelated but always amusing, but valid point I saw made recently of, yeah, when you think about Haiti, about Tartarus, they get so much more creative than burn them in fire for eternity. But Hades is most of those people aren't being punished by Hades. They were Zeus's pet project. In
Yeah,
fairness, a number of them for understandable reasons. Like, you're a cannibal. Okay, we're gonna have to torture you now. But still,
yeah. The Romans also did have similar to the Ulfsarkers, they had society that venerated the wolf, and they had holidays and stuff that celebrated the wolf that supposedly suckled Romulus and Remus. I think it was called Lupercalia.
I, I've heard the term Lupercalia before, but you've told in a minute you just told me more than I knew about the entire thing.
Really, you've never heard of that one before? They had a whole big society of like they would wear wolf pelts and run through the streets of Rome, and they would,
I think I've read about it somewhere once, but
yeah,
I, I don't remember anything about it other than I remember the name Lupercalia.
yeah, it was like a whole big thing. I remember it because I read a historical novel of Rome that went into detail about it in for one scene.
Interesting. So it's another example of a more, and I hate this distinction, but a more civilized society that still is maintaining this tradition
Hmm.
of using the wolf skins.
Yeah, so it crosses all kinds of barriers.
Okay, Chris Palermo adds, "Hello, hello. Sicily were the first to come up with silver weapons. Anyway, Sicilians are nuts in a fight. Um, silver using silver to kill supernatural beings is certainly a thing in folklore, but it's really more common with vampires.
Yeah.
There is one famous historical event that is often attributed to a werewolf, although it's not. Okay, why did the camera just? I don't know. But anyway, which is a series of animal attacks that happened in France, involving that is famously known as the Beast of Gévaudan. Um, and allegedly, it finally came to an end when a hunter killed the beast with a silver bullet.
Hmm.
The problems being one, it's described as a large wolf-like beast. Um, that's a bit vague, and there's no descriptions of somebody turning into a wolf or a wolf-like beast, so it's a stretch to suggest that it's a werewolf. There are a whole bunch of other theories about it. Was popular one making the rounds recently is that was a hyena.
Hmm.
Um, which just seems odd because I'm pretty sure the hyenas are smaller than wolves.
Yeah, they're more like dog size.
They're big, which is a little vague given there are in fact breeds of dog that are bigger than wolves.
Yeah, but they're not huge. I mean,
Yeah,
they're only dangerous in packs. That's one of the reasons why is because they're not super big.
but there's other theories that it was some sort of hybrid animal, and the whole famous movie Brotherhood of the Wolf or something
Brotherhood of
like
the
that.
Wolf, yeah.
that suggests that basically it was a conspiracy type of thing.
Hmm.
Um, the re- and here's the other problem that muddies all of the waters about this is that the creators of the original movie Wolfman, which
Hmm.
is what mostly cemented the idea that werewolves were killed by Silver,
Hmm.
went back and republished and redistributed older werewolf legends where only Silver and changed it to where only Silver would kill a werewolf.
Hmm.
So it's impossible to know, or difficult at least to know, is this the original version or was this doctored? Um, those are some serious issues with using silver as a metal for bullets just because of the melting point.
Yeah, it doesn't make for a very good bullet.
Um, but in the majority of traditional werewolf folklore, you want to kill a werewolf, try a regular bullet, try an arrow, try a sword.
Hmm.
Pretty much anything that'll kill a wolf will kill a werewolf.
Yeah.
The one exception to the major exception to this is when we come back to Scandinavia,
Hmm.
because they're in the Prosadas and some of the other mythical slash historical books about the Vikings. There are stories of berserkers who did in fact transform into a giant bear during battle, and as long as they were turned into that bear, they were unstoppable killing machines. Nothing could hurt them. When the battle was over, they'd be forced to sleep for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
And that's when they were vulnerable. Because they can't change into a bear, they're asleep. And that means, yeah, regular weapons work just fine. Um, but otherwise, there are a bunch of other things, remedies for werewolves that are less violent than killing them. In
Yeah.
some traditions, if you call a werewolf by its Christian name, it'll turn back into a human.
Yeah.
Or if you hit them in the head with a, which is not necessarily pleasant, but potentially survivable, with a piece of iron, they turn back into a human.
Hmm.
Um, which the occult types have suggested is even more argument for them being some sort of spirit type phenomenon, where the humans wrapping spiritual energy around their physical body. So there's still a human underneath all of the spiritual stuff,
Yeah.
but the body looks like a wolf.
Cool. It's kind of how I do it in my fictional universe.
Nice. It makes sense because from a practical standpoint, you have this problem called the first law of thermodynamics, where
Yeah.
you can't simply create new matter. Wolves are on average much heavier than humans.
Yeah. Well, and also just trying to explain biologically how a human body can be twisted and reform into something that resembles a wolf is pretty far-fetched. It's
Oh yeah, that's a whole other issue with the idea, but it's like
yeah.
even if you torture your way through an explanation for that, you still have one of the most fundamental laws of physics saying this can't happen.
Yeah.
And both become an even a bigger problem, like with the idea of kitsune and things like that, because foxes are much smaller and lighter than humans,
Yep.
and all that mass has to go somewhere. Dresden Files, I know, resolves it by basically saying it gets shunted into the spirit world, or the spirit world energy is shunted into the physical.
Yeah. Do
But
that.
most, I like that particularly because a lot of things don't think about. Wait, there's a giant logistical problem with this idea.
Well, that's always the thing with mythology and folklore and horror movies is they tend to just brush those kind of concerns aside.
Some do, others don't. The most recent Wolfman certainly doesn't have as many issues for the laws of biology and physics.
Hmm.
Have you seen that one yet?
No, the Blumhouse one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't wasn't that interested in it, honestly. It didn't look that good to me.
Amisha and I went to see it in the theater. I actually really like it.
Hmm.
Um, just in the fact that while it goes very much with the movie classic, werewolves are more like Neanderthals than wolves, and they just turned big and hairy. Um, they still actually managed to come up with something new.
Hmm.
Um, okay, do you care? I'll tell you, and I'll tell anyone who's listening who hasn't seen it yet who doesn't care.
No, go ahead. Spoiler alert.
Okay, so folks, I'm about if you haven't seen the movie yet and you want to, spoilers. So mute me now, and I'll just go like this, and you'll know that we're done. Um, so the premise is that basically it's a virus, it's a disease,
Hmm.
and wolf disease or something like that, where you turn into this big, you grow a whole bunch of fur, and your body distorts a little, and that's about it. As
Yeah.
well as your mind goes psycho and you start killing people. You
Yeah.
don't. It becomes particularly more realistic because you don't keep transforming back and forth. Over a couple of days, you turn into this beast, and there's no going back.
Yeah.
Spoilers over.
Yeah.
Um,
Ginger Snaps did something similar. Those movies.
hmm,
It was a one-way transformation, and it was
I'm, not-
very much more biological.
I've never. I keep meaning to watch them, but I've never seen them.
They're fun. They're not
Uh,
bad movies.
yeah, I've heard nothing but good things. I'll say there's another old classic that you're old enough to remember, but maybe some of our listeners are not. But Wolf with Jack Nicholson and Michelle
Oh
Pfeiffer,
yeah, I love that one.
which is also again he's just slowly transforming into a wolf.
Yeah, it's a spiritual transformation
Yeah,
as well. Yeah, I thought that one was a really interesting movie.
it is. I think it's a neat concept. Um, and there's tons of other ones that have done different takes on the idea. There, another one I've never watched, but I keep meaning to, the Wolfen,
Oh
with the
yeah.
premise that they're not. There's no shapeshifting involved. They're just highly intelligent,
Well,
physically different wolves.
yeah, that one's weird because the movie is very different from the book. There's a book that it was based on by Whitley Strieber.
Yeah, I read some of the book.
Yeah, the movie is rather different.
Mm.
They went in like a slightly different direction, tried to make
But,
them more mystical.
mm. Which is one thing I've said more than once, and I stand by. And I will give credit to a friend of the show who's actually done this, as well as you working on it. But I think I don't know. I like the classic movie Werewolf well enough. It's not a terrible motif. It's been done very well a number of times. But I think it'd be interesting to see actual folkloric werewolves in movies,
Yeah, exactly.
or books, and they just don't show up very often. One time they've shown up that we've talked about many times is Jim Butcher uses a lot of the folklore more in his stories.
Yeah.
But another example, the friend of the show I mentioned, John French has actually more classical werewolves in
Hmm.
some of his stories, as an kind of like an offshoot of the you've been and you become a werewolf. So he
Okay.
has both ideas together. And
Nice.
I wish for the life of me, for promotional purposes, I could remember one of the stories he brings it up in. I'm pretty sure it's in the Last Monster, which is the final collection of Bianca Jones short stories. But I think it's come up before, like elsewhere. I don't remember where. And it's a thing I've argued before with people who run role playing games and with authors. It's like, if you want to do a different take on a monster, just go back to the folklore because
Yeah.
everything has been so twisted by the movies.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there that's relatively untapped.
And even some of the, I mean, I think there's still interesting ways to use a lot of times. I think the theme that werewolf movies go with is the idea of loss of identity, of
Hmm.
turning into this angry, hungry beast.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think you do that with the folklore version as well because it's like you made a deal with the devil, you made a deal with some sinister occult being that's maybe not necessarily defined. And the nature of the deal, the nature of this wolfskin belt artifact that you were given is starting to warp your personality.
Hmm. Yeah. But it's like usually the idea was just that the person wanted to be a wolf because they could run around and do things that a person couldn't, but they retained their human
Intelligence.
intelligence. Yeah.
And you can
That I
keep
always
that
thought was the
idea as
coolest.
well.
Yeah, I thought
It,
that was the coolest part, the idea of a werewolf with that kind of ferocity and strength,
yeah.
but also human intelligence and cunning. Silver Bullet, the Stephen King movie, uh, did that. So did The Howling.
There's also a really, both of which are also really interesting takes
Yeah.
on werewolves. I mean, I know, I haven't seen the movie in a while, but I know particularly in the novel Cycle of the Werewolf, which is what they
Mm.
based the movie Silver Bullet on, his transformation isn't tied to the moon.
No.
It's cyclical, but it's a little unclear what it is. And for that matter, he didn't, he wasn't bitten by a werewolf. The priest in the novel got like mixed, was doing sinful things, and it was more of a punishment type of idea. Although
Mm.
even again, the novel's kind of vague on why,
Yeah.
but it's implied that it's more of a you were a bad person and this curse has been placed upon you,
Yeah.
which is definitely in keeping with a lot of the curse folklore about werewolves. It was usually some kind of punishment. Um, yeah, I think the ideas are there, and like you said, it's like they did this on purpose. They want, and it makes sense, particularly in a historical standpoint. You know, when it's medieval Europe, and there may be laws about who can hunt and where they can hunt, and the fact that even if you're legally allowed to hunt when you're hunting, you still have all the weaknesses of being a human hunter.
Mm.
Well, now you can turn into a wolf, can run faster, is stronger, has better senses. You're now a much better hunter,
Yeah.
and it becomes easier to provide for your family. Although in most folk, in most of the most of the Christian era folklore, you become a werewolf because you made a deal with classically the devil, but there are fairies and things like that can do it too.
Yeah.
So I would think if you're going with that angle, particularly, there's the idea that there's always a catch, there's always a price. So you could almost do this tragic figure idea of someone who takes the power to feed his family during a drought or during a hard winter. But as a consequence of the deal, his mind is warping and he's becoming more of a monster.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot of potential there. Um, and it's also worth noting, I think, and we've talked about this on the show more than once, that werewolves aren't always bad guys in folklore in stories.
Yeah.
Um, there's twice of Livonia, who was a werewolf that worked for God, that we talked about more than once.
Mm.
Um, it gets a little more awkward that in the 19th century in particular, there's a number of German stories where werewolves are folk heroes and
Mm.
kind of representing the classical lifestyle versus the modern industrial age.
Mm.
Um, a notion that led up into the 20th century into the Nazis using werewolves as a symbol.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Brian, you there? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, you started to say something you got and like bleeped out or something.
Oh, it looked to me, it looked like you froze up. Uh,
Weird.
I had said that Hitler really loved werewolves. He embraced that mythology a lot.
Yeah, it fits. I mean, it's that raw primal combat, aggressive warrior type figure that, of course, he was trying to raise up as a symbol.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a type of Russian werewolf or Slavic and Russian called the Volkolak,
mm-hmm.
which apparently they can be they can be created a number of ways. Like if you perform certain spells to make yourself into one, or you go out and like roll around in the morning dew. You
Hmm.
you can make one, or go to certain trees. Or there's a couple of like weird. It's one of those
There's
weird,
a lot of weird ways to become a werewolf
yeah,
in
like
folklore.
drinking water out of a wolf's paw
Wolf's
print.
paw print. Yes,
That's yeah.
I was literally
Maybe.
just thinking of that.
Yeah, that's one of the fun ones. But anyway, they are sometimes they can be predatory, but they've also in some of the legends and stuff were protective of like their towns and villages. Like they would sort of become
Hmm.
a protector of the town.
There's a figure in Irish folklore, not really a true werewolf because it's just a very intelligent wolf that can walk on its hind legs. It doesn't transform, but often gets associated with werewolves, and is not malevolent at all. It's more of a trickster figure, and actually somewhat benevolent in some cases.
Hmm.
Um, which I think is also running into another theme we've talked about on the show multiple times. Of the further you go back into mythology and folklore, the more the categories blend together.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of overlap.
You know, the Greek werewolves that when they die they become vampires.
Yeah, the Barkalak.
Mm. The fact for that matter, if you read the novel Dracula, there's a couple of times he's called a werewolf as well as a vampire.
Mhm. Yeah, well, technically it's true. He can change into a wolf and back.
Yep, as well as a bat and
Yeah,
mist. Where and of course where unlike the bat, the werewolf was actually at least the wolf part has more basis in folklore
yeah,
as opposed to basis in the writings of Charles Darwin for the bat.
yeah,
It still fascinates me.
yeah. Dracula just maybe he wouldn't have seemed as scary if he turned into a black cat the way a lot of folklore vampires
Not
do.
to modern people,
No.
but of course the reality is through the Middle Ages, black cats were usually thought to be witches or demons in disguise.
Hmm. So it made perfect sense.
And I mean, particularly talking about overlap. When you look at stories from witch trials, particularly like Salem, Salem is full of stories are full of people turning into cats or dogs, and it's a very common idea that they could turn into animals. What I find hilarious is that if you read the Malleus Maleficarum, there's a whole speculation about the idea that witches could change into animals.
Hmm.
And this book, that let's remember, is about how witchcraft is real and witches are in league with Satan. And here's how to torture them to get them to confess. And then here's how to execute them properly. So this awful, dreadful book ultimately comes to the conclusion that humans can't turn into to animals. That instead, the demon is screwing with the person's brain and they're having a delusion of being an animal. Um,
Thanks.
Chris Palermo comments problem with Nazi werewolf cult was dealing with battle prayers to the wolf mother Angrboda. The Nazi breeding program rejected their children. Dogs, wolves became very protective of any child they adopt. Well, of course, the reality is dogs are just wolves.
Yeah.
I mean, the scientific name for the gray wolf is Canis lupus. The scientific name for the domesticated dog is Canis lupus familiaris. They're pretty much all dogs are about a 10,000 year breeding program by humans.
Yeah.
And for that matter, the majority of dog breeds are a 19th century game playing games with eugenics, which is also, of course, why so many purebred dog breeds have serious genetic problems.
Yeah. Too much
The
inbreeding.
sad reality of these stories is, of course, that they've also fueled a lot of irrational fear of wolves.
Yeah.
Um, along with more practical, though still harsh reasons of the fact that wolves are predators. If you present them with easy to capture prey, also known as livestock, their natural inclination is going to be to eat the livestock. Has led to the, but of course, all this mindset has led to them being wiped out in many parts of the world.
Yeah, kind of shame.
Yeah. Whereas, much like coyotes, actual attacks by wolves on humans are just about unheard of. And when, on the rare occasion it's happened at all, it's usually either attributable to rabies or attributable to starvation and and famine in areas.
Hmm.
Or of course the third and the most common reason that wild animals attack humans, with almost any animal, is the human did something stupid.
True. It's our animal PSA for the
Yeah,
night.
it's like, yes, if you start punching the wild animal, don't complain when it bites you. And don't put dogs down because human did stupid and the animal defended itself. So let's see, werewolves. Werewolf, where their castle, which is the fairly cute t-shirt I've seen with the trans pride colors, and then a werewolf howl, looking up and howling, and just their wolf, and I approve. Um, Needless to say, it's not real common to hear people claim to be werewolves anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there are people that still claim to be vampires. Um,
Mhm.
and there are
Well,
at least a few. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say Therians.
Yep, that's exactly
So,
what I was about to go to. To is
yeah,
the Therian
just,
and more generally the otherkin community,
yeah,
which for anyone who doesn't know is a group of a subculture of people that claim and some to some extent see themselves as part animal or part supernatural creature, or
yeah, or
sometimes I'm
having
sorry.
a spirit
Yeah,
that is akin to a kind of animal.
I've met a couple over the years. Um, I knew the one that's like he claimed that like part of his soul just felt like a panther.
Hmm.
So he had this whole hypothesis of the gods bonding animals to certain family or animal spirits to certain family lines to help them be more effective at hunting and things of that nature. Um, I find the whole thing a little weird, to be completely honest.
Yeah,
Um,
I've met a few now at like Iron Garden and stuff, but they're again they're cool people. Like I haven't met any that are crazy and honestly believe that they physically transform into animals or whatever. They just see
every
it as
time
more of a
I've heard of it, it's a
spiritual thing.
spiritual thing, not a physical
Yeah,
transportation. And
yeah,
I find it odd, and that's okay. I'm not like judging them as bad people. I think the majority of them are all the ones I've met. And I haven't. You've probably almost certainly met more than I have, but are perfectly nice, reasonable, rational people. They just believe something I find a little strange. And
mm,
to be fair, I believe lots of things that other people find strange. So I'm not one to judge that.
yeah,
Yeah, Curious Palermo bringing up again the binding animal spirits slash totems, which again, it was just a particular reason that as odd as I find the Therian concept, I'm not, I wonder and I'm not judgmental about it just because none of these are ideas that have been with us for a long time.
yeah.
Going back to totem magic and things like that, it's like, I don't know. I'm not, it's not my place to judge. Um, But yeah, as you said, generally speaking, you don't see a lot of people that claim to actually be able to physically transform. There,
That's a hard one to back up.
Well, yeah, because the simple solution is like, okay, let's see you do it.
Yeah, exactly. Show it. Show me.
Um, People that claim because there are actually people out there. I think particularly from well, I've heard of it. It's maybe more common with some of the Native American reservations. There are people that claim to do a degree of shape shifting, but again, it's more of a spiritual. They leave their body and they become an animal,
Yeah, or they
not that
project
they're
their
actually physically
consciousness.
turning into an animal.
Yeah, sometimes they can project their consciousness into an
Yeah.
animal.
Yes. Also an idea. There's a movie. There's an animated movie that deals with that idea with werewolves that I can't think of the name of. It's
Hmm.
supposed to be very good. Done by a fairly well respected. I want to say it might have been done by the same people who did the Book of Kells.
Hmm.
Well, you know,
Okay. Not familiar with that one.
I know it's specifically Irish folklore.
Hmm.
And this idea that basically, as I understand it, they're not transforming so much as taking over the body of an animal. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard good things. Wolfwalkers, that's the movie.
Oh, I've not heard of that one. Sounds interesting though.
Yeah, it is part of an Irish folklore trilogy, along with the better known movie The Secret of Kells. The Song of the Sea is the third one.
Hmm.
I'm trying to. I've seen like a little bit of it at something else, and I remember particularly like the villain was an actual historical figure.
Hmm.
They don't call him by his full name, right? The villain's called Lord Protector, and he's actually based on someone real.
Oh,
Okay, there we go. Let's see if I that tells me. But it's something people might want to check out for yet another take on the werewolf folklore. And look that up. This Lord killed the last. Is that who it was? Because I know it was based on an actual person, though I want to say he wasn't quite the horrible person he was in the movie in real life. Oh, yeah, there's a complicated choice. He's based on Oliver Cromwell.
oh. I was just gonna ask if it was Cromwell because of the Lord Protector thing. Yeah, they love to like throw dirt on his name.
Well, yeah, and
I mean, he was not a great guy, but yeah.
he wasn't as bad as he's depicted potentially, but yeah, he was a pretty bad guy. Should sit down and watch that movie. From everything I've heard, it seems like something I would enjoy. I just so much to watch, so little time.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we got anything else to cover werewolf wise?
I can't think of anything offhand, but there is something we should cover in general because we constantly forget this.
Hmm.
Folks, if you enjoy this channel, if you enjoy what we do, please take the time to like, comment, subscribe. If you happen to have a little bit of money laying around that isn't doing anything for you, you might consider joining our Patreon. We don't admittedly have a lot of Patreon exclusives, which is in large part a function of I don't want to make content that you have to pay for in
Hmm.
that sense. I'd rather have my content be available to everybody. So I'm not really. I mean, this may change. This is not set in stone, but at the moment, I'm not super inclined to put anything behind a paywall.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
you also. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Be like that famous werewolf influencer, like and subscribe.
Yes, like and subscribe.
Yeah.
The legendary werewolf influencer. Um, just because liking and subscribing is free, as is sharing it on your social media to get other people to come watch us.
Sure.
We are back in track. I know we've been a little back and forth lately, but we should be back on up on Monday on next Sunday, as far as I know. I mean, I don't have anything going on that I know of. Do you?
No, I don't think so. So should be here if we can come up with a topic.
Uh, we could. Oh, and that's the other thing, folks. If you have a topic we haven't covered that you'd like us to, put in the comments. We
No,
will look.
absolutely. Yeah, suggest some topics.
I was just thinking that I really need to, because people brought our regulars have brought it up and we're interested in it. I need to do a little research into this idea of DMT entities, so I can even if only briefly comment on it. And at the moment, I just don't know enough about the subject to be able to give an informed opinion.
Okay.
So look for that somewhere down the pipe. I'm not promising I'll get it all done next week, even for next week, but we'll do it soon. I also don't know if I'll find enough there to do an entire episode, unless I can tie it into a larger topic.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm wrong and I'll find a huge amount of information to talk about. But I think that's going to do it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank everybody for listening. Remember, this is your host, demonologist, and paranormal encyclopedia, Kevin Mears, saying good night and God bless.
And Brian McKinley saying, keep your fangs sharp.
Good night, everyone. We'll see you next week. Let's see.